And welcome back to Connecticut Inside Out, the podcast about Connecticut, a deep blue, historically progressive state that would never just leave nonviolent offenders in jail during a pandemic to die. I'm your host.
I'm Amanda Gabriel.
Themselves. There we are.
And I'm Tim Gabriel. I think you glitched out like when you were saying your name. So.
Oh.
And
we have with us tonight Alex Taubes, who is a candidate for the Democratic nomination for the 11th Senate District in Connecticut. The 11th District goes from the Hamden Cheshire line down in sort of a weird line, catching just a tiny bit of Spring Glen in North Haven, and then all the way down to Lighthouse Point. It makes no particular geographic sense, but that's par for the course on Senate maps. So Alex, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us, who are you and why are you running?
So my name's Alex Taubes. I'm a civil rights attorney in New Haven. And I'm running for state senate because we really need a radical change to make things better in our state. Things are not going the way that people really think they are in a blue state, but in fact, we need real good progressive advocates. And so that's why I'm running for the state senate. And I'm running against a very powerful incumbent who's very entrenched. He's been in the state legislature for 40 years. And right now we're just struggling to get onto the ballot so that we can give the voters a choice on August 11th, which is going to be the primary if we succeed, which we will.
So Alex, I want to get into some of the statewide things, but I had a throwaway line in my intro. And can you tell us just a little bit more about your practice areas and what your focus is in your day job?
Yeah, so I'm actually speaking to you all right now from where I live, which is the Mill River Crossing development here in New Haven, which is a public housing mixed income development which was built to replace what was once the Farnham Courts, which are behind us here, which were a public housing project known for drug dealing, violence, and extremely poor conditions for the people who live there. And that this is where I have both where I live with my wife and also where I have my law practice, where I'm a civil rights attorney for the people of Connecticut. And I represent people who have been harmed in some way by our system, whether it's the criminal justice system, whether it's corporate greed, or people who, sorry, I just got a call from somebody, but people who are, who are just struggling and who are in need of help. So the main thing that I've been focusing on in recent weeks has been attempting to do everything I can to get people released from prison in light of the COVID pandemic, which is ravaging through the facilities of Connecticut jails and prisons and has already caused 7 people, unfortunately, to die, and hundreds of the people who are in the custody of Connecticut to be test positive for the virus.
Perfect. And you're also suing the state on behalf of all voters, I think, right?
That's right. Well, because Connecticut has such restrictive laws for voting, whether it's voting by absentee ballot, which is among the strictest laws in the country for allowing people to vote by mail, or just getting on the ballot as a candidate, like our campaign. We were not able to gain the support of 15% of the delegates at the Democratic Party convention last Tuesday for the state Senate seat of the 11th District. Because of that, the only recourse to get on the ballot under Connecticut law is to collect 5% of the signatures of people from the district by petition signature. And given COVID, that's simply an impossible task for for any campaign to be able to accomplish. And so because of all of that, we've brought a case in federal court saying that Connecticut is violating the civil rights of all voters.
I think it's really interesting work that you're doing, and thank you for being out there and protecting civil rights. Should you get the nomination and win the Senate seat, What kind of stuff would you want to do up at the state capitol?
I want to shine a light on some of the issues that don't really get addressed right now at the state capitol, or at least aren't getting addressed in the way that we really need. And I mean, the paradigmatic issue is climate change, where the issues, with the legislation that's getting put forward is just not adequate to deal with the enormity of the problem and the necessity for immediate action. And so that's one example. Criminal justice is obviously another. There's a number of laws that, I'm practicing under right now, which I'd very much like to have revised by the legislature. And so, that's really, that's really like my focus. Another example is making the Connecticut democratic system more accessible for people, more transparent, allowing ordinary citizens to put in more of their input into government decisions. Ranked choice voting is a pet issue of mine, something where voters will have more choices when they go to vote because they can rank their choices when they vote for public officials, something that's been tried out in Maine, and I think is a really interesting idea that needs to be implemented in Connecticut to address some of the staleness of our democracy, some of the need for change.
So because this is a podcast, it's not exactly hard-hitting journalism. We get to go down whatever rabbit hole we decide we want to go down. So the first rabbit hole that I'd like to go down is climate change. Can you talk a little bit about what specifically you're looking for to address climate change? Like, what can we be doing? What kind of legislation would you want to enact?
Well, when you think about Connecticut, a lot of people think about suburbs and therefore, suburban sprawl. And so what we really need in Connecticut is an approach to growth that takes into account the effects of climate change and transitions us towards a future where we're not emitting nearly as much carbon emissions as we're emitting now. And I think there's a combination of policies that could be addressed to get there, which is largely under the umbrella of what's called the Green New Deal. And the reason why I like the frame of the Green New Deal is because it's not just about protecting the environment, but also transitioning the economy to a more just economy where people of different backgrounds are given an equal opportunity in the economy, because the economy that we have now that's based on fossil fuels is also highly unequal.
So I've seen a lot of insurers up in the Hartford area have started changing the way that they do business in order to limit their investment in fossil fuel companies. We've seen through, the COVID pandemic, more and more folks are working from home. Is there anything that you would do with a lot of Connecticut's larger employers to try to incentivize them to keep people home, to keep people working remotely or teleworking where possible?
Well, when it comes to COVID-19, we're not doing nearly enough of that. I mean, we need to essentially be paying people to stay at home in any way that we can, and reducing the amount of economic activity to a sensible amount when it puts people at risk. My father is a radiologist. He works at the hospital, Manchester Memorial Hospital up in Eastern Connecticut, and also at Rockville General Hospital. And as a radiologist, he sees the x-rays of people, their chest x-rays, when they've got COVID-19 infections. He's never seen anything like it in his life. And he's read probably over 1 million chest x-rays. The lethality of the disease, the quickness with which symptoms arise in people, the infectiousness of the disease is something that we really don't even know the full extent of. And most historic pandemics have had an even deadlier second peak than their first. So rather than looking at how we can expand people getting out of their homes and opening up their businesses, as the governor has been focusing on in recent weeks, I would really still be encouraging us to hunker down, but recognizing the economic impact that has on people and compensating them for it. Our Constitution says you cannot take life, liberty, or property without due compensation. And here we're taking away people's work, which is really a combination of all three. And so many of those people who are having their work taken away are getting nothing back in compensation.
I hate this question because I think it's like a nonsense question, but in this one instance, I think it applies. The state of Connecticut can't print money. So if we want to compensate people to stay home, how do we do that at the state level without, or are you arguing for a federal solution?
There definitely needs to be a federal solution, and that was even true before COVID-19 when you looked at the legacy pension debts of places like Connecticut and Illinois and our inner cities, where a lot of the legacy pensioners are actually not even living in the state anymore. They're living in other states like South Carolina and Florida. So it's a national issue, and all state government finance right now is a national issue that needs to be addressed by the federal government. There's no question about that. But while the government cannot exactly print money, I think that Connecticut probably is richer than it acts and feels, and could probably borrow more money than it is. And it could probably do more than it's doing. And I think that the reason that the governor is not is because he's been overly focused on the point of view of a very narrow slice of people on Wall Street over the point of view of the people who are struggling in their ordinary day-to-day lives.
How do we break through there? Like, how do we get him to care about everybody else?
Well, the reason why, my whole theory of it is that the Democratic primary in a blue state is a powerful mechanism for accountability and moving our country forward and enacting the policies and the proposals that could really inspire the rest of the nation to change. And so I want to enliven that mechanism. So first of all, I'm challenging the most powerful politician I can find through the mechanism of the Connecticut primary. And where I'm finding roadblocks, I'm bringing a case in federal court to bring them down with me when we break them down. And I think the same thing needs to apply next year and the year after when we think about our governor and his campaign for re-election. We need to think about who we're going to put forward to challenge him to move forward, so that he knows that his only mechanism of accountability is not simply the swing voters in the last 3 days of an extremely close governor's election with where things, scandal-based governance, but actually there's governance that is driven by ideas and policies and well-informed voters who want to hold him accountable.
Speaking of, your primary opponent, Martin Looney, what are some of the pain points that you've seen in terms of his tenure, and especially of late, where you feel like he's deserves a primary challenge?
Well, I really respect Senator Looney, and my goal in running for office is certainly not to tear him down or to denigrate his accomplishments. And one of the things that I admire about him most is that he has traditionally associated himself with labor, which is something that I would very much champion as a state senator. That being said, where he and I think, have disagreed in recent years is largely based in two areas. First, I think that he has stood against government transparency and campaign finance reform in a number of high-profile incidents that have been chronicled by the news media, most recently in 2019 by the Connecticut Mirror. And second, he's partnered with suburban legislators on harmful legislation, which may have served some larger goal strategic purpose, but actually caused an imminent harm to the people who he is entrusted to serve. And that example, I think, also occurred last year or 3 years ago with the passage of the NIMBY bill that watered down Connecticut's anti-snob zoning law, Connecticut General Statutes 8-30G. I mean, it's not a sexiest issue out there, but that's kind of why I'm running, is because I try to keep my finger to the pulse of these bills that get passed in the middle of the night on the last day of the session, where there's the least amount of government transparency. And I want to make it clear to those who write those bills that someone is reading them, and the people who are affected do have a voice.
Alex, that format, though, has been, it long predates Martin Looney in the Senate. How does one senator change that last-minute dark of night, push it at the last moment thing that I think both houses of the legislature seem to have perfected?
Well, out of the 65 years of Connecticut's modern democracy, Senator Looney has served in the legislature for 40 of them. So it's, to the extent that he is responsible. He's been the leader of the Senate for almost 10 years. And so, what I look at in terms of leadership is not to tear him down or to say that how he acted in those 10 years was wrong, but to say, now that those 10 years have passed, where can we improve? And where can we learn and become more well-rounded? Where can we learn and become more progressive and more open in how we advance our agenda? And so, even if it's not to replace Senator Looney, it's to succeed him is my goal. and to advance some of the underlying purposes behind a lot of the things that he has accomplished. You know, under his senatorship, we have become a state with public financing for elections. But 15 years later, the rules for public financing are only available still in English. And we don't really see as many challenges or as many uses of that public financing system in the communities that could most use that money, right? So we need a new generation of leadership to kind of push the ball forward that next step. And that's where I think that I can come in, not to denigrate or to take down someone else who's dedicated his entire life to public service.
So I got to ask you a question about ECS funding. I sit on the Board of Education in North Haven, but I do not speak for the Board of Education. I'm just one member. My comments and opinions are my own. But North Haven is objectively, we're a very comfortable middle-class town. But when you look at us compared to our peers within our district reference group, we're objectively underfunded from an ECS perspective. And we tend to be a relatively red town. And there's not an appetite for increasing school funding. So as our healthcare costs continue to increase disproportionately year over year, and our funding is not keeping up, we're able to offer less and less services. And our ECS funds are, as I stated, objectively lower than other districts that look like us within our district reference group. They get, on average, $1,000 more per pupil than North Haven. Is there anything that you have planned for the ECS formula at the state level?
Absolutely, and I'm really happy that you brought this up because it's one of my signature issues. Not only because of the impact on the towns that make up the majority of my district, Hamden and New Haven, that are obviously underfunded to everyone's knowledge and everyone knows, but also for the lesser known towns that are affected by the lack of an ECS formula, if we're being honest, because there really is no formula in any kind of scientific or mathematical sense. It's really just a hodgepodge of what the legislature throws into the board and decides, you know, each town is supposed to get. And I actually had a lawsuit where I was involved with about that 5 years ago, where I was a visiting clinical professor at Yale Law School in a long-standing litigation that said that Connecticut needs to have a real formula for funding its public schools, and put forward a practical solution, which was the creation of an education cost study, which really tries to drill down on the needs of the students in the actual schools and school districts and figures out how much it costs to educate them, and then determines how much schools should get based on the needs, building from the ground up rather than basing the entire formula off of political decisions and decision making. And we actually almost won that case. We came in second place. We lost 4-3 in the Connecticut Supreme Court. But interestingly, the Supreme Court called on the legislature to fix the problem because they said that they didn't have the power to fix it. And so we went to the legislature the very next year to ask for an education cost study. Instead, the legislature came forward with a new quote unquote formula, but then said that they would be implementing it over 10 years. So that over the 10 years that the formula was being implemented, every school in the state of Connecticut will be underfunded for 10 years. I don't think we can wait 10 years for correct funding of our public schools. And whatever it takes, that's what I'm going to promote, whether it even means looking at things like the statewide mill rate that Vermont introduced to try to equalize mill rates between towns and create a centralized system for education funding. It's a conversation that a lot of people are uncomfortable with, but it's one that I'll take head on.
It's an equity issue. And, you know, we talked to Justin Farmer earlier this week about it. And it, you know, the lack of educational funding has an outsized impact on our students of greatest need. And it really does a disservice, and it's an equity issue for me.
Absolutely. And equity is where what drives me to my work as a lawyer, my work in politics. You know, I grew up in Madison, which is the epitome of a segregated town, income, racially. And, you know, I have privilege that I still maintain in our society. And what drives me to work towards the work that I'm doing is to push back for equity in our society. So that's really, so the car tax and the home tax in New Haven and Hamden exacerbate the racial wealth gap. The people who are starting out their careers, starting out their lives, starting out their families face a higher effective tax rate in Connecticut if you're a person of color than people in the all-white suburbs do with lower mill rates. And that's an effect that trickles down and exacerbates all of the inequities in our society. So this is something that I'm really passionate about, and I'm going to keep talking about. I don't think it's something where I necessarily think I would disagree with Senator Looney. I think he probably would agree with this conversation, but it's something that I would carry forward.
How do you even begin to tackle that equity in the tax rate? Especially given that a lot of these, you'll be caucusing with Democrats. A lot of these wealthier districts tend to be represented by Democrats as well. From their end, it seems like they're talking to their constituents. Their constituents tend to be kind of like these wealthy white people that don't want their taxes to go up. But they are kind of holding or hoarding all the money that needs to go out to the rest of the state. So how do you get them to come to our side?
I don't know that I would say I have a secret plan, but I have a whole lot of plans. And I mean, one of the things that is what we started with on this call is think about the 11th district and its shape and how it's drawn. That's no accident. That was intentional. The people who are sitting in those seats are the people who drew those lines. Well, guess what? Connecticut is about to draw lines again. For 10 years, we're going to be affected by the lines that are drawn by the Reapportionment Commission next January. And I want to be a state senator when the people are picked for that Reapportionment Commission. I want to really grill them, and I want to bring that public process to light and to openness. Because I think that we have a political system that doesn't allow for competition. And because we don't have competition, hyperlocalism rules and parochialism rules. And if we had a little bit more transparency and competition in our political system, I think it would go a long way. But I don't want to give up all of my plans.
I feel like I've heard that one before.
That's fair, but I do have a lot of crazy ideas. I mean, at the end of the day, we have to try new tactics. When the legislature was considering a regional education bill 2 years ago, the school districts in places like Westport flooded the Capitol with school buses full of kids. Like, there's no reason why we can't be organizing the same kind of thing in places that are even more negatively impacted right now by the system. Good.
All right, so go ahead, Tim.
No, go ahead.
Please.
So bringing it back to your work as a criminal justice lawyer, what do you think is the big holdup in terms of getting some of these people that have health conditions that you've been fighting for out of prisons where they've been kind of like in harm's way? What is the holdup at the state level?
It's everywhere. Every door we go to is closed. It's really unbelievable. And I come to this usually as a civil rights lawyer, who's someone who tries to vindicate rights by bringing a damages lawsuit. I don't have as much experience in the criminal defense world as some of my colleagues, for example, in the ACLU. But everywhere we're going with this COVID crisis and these Eighth Amendment claims, we are getting denied. And I could just give you a long list of examples, whether it's the administration of the Department of Correction, which has the power to grant community release, medical furlough, and a variety of other remedies, which have almost been blanket denied by people within Roland Cook's administration of the Department of Correction, or the state's attorney's offices of the state of Connecticut, highly unelected, unaccountable prosecutors' offices who have the power to modify sentences that they were a part of meting out in order to provide some relief and have essentially granted almost none, to the Board of Pardons and Paroles, which has the statutory authority to do compassionate release and medical parole under Connecticut law, but has only granted 2 compassionate releases between March 1st and May 1st of this year, according to data uncovered by the Connecticut Mirror. So, and then finally the governor, who has the ability to issue a reprieve, a commutation of sentence that will only last until the legislature comes back into session in its regular session. Kind of the perfect safety valve for particular people who maybe you don't want to relieve them from their sentence. You just want to protect them from COVID. But he has not used that for a single person, despite his power under the state constitution. So from the very, very nitty-gritty to the day-to-day to the very, very top of Connecticut government, we're not seeing any kind of response. And what they do instead is tout numbers going down which a lot of it just has to do with somewhat slower numbers of people going in and people reaching the ends of their sentences, which is a good thing, and we encourage that. But the kind of effort to identify and then process and release people who have extreme medical vulnerabilities. I mean, I just got referred a 66-year-old man with heart and lung conditions. Who, you know, these are people who should have been found earlier and released. Not nearly enough is being done.
Alex, I want to be mindful of your time on this. Talk to us about what your timeline looks like in the campaign between now and the primary, and what people can do if they want to help you out.
Great. So right now we're in a mad dash to collect 1,016 petition signatures of registered Democrats in the 11th district. You mentioned it before, Hamden, New Haven, and North Haven. And we have a number of ways where you can do that. You can call or text me or email me, and I can give my number and my email, but also you can go to my website, which has instructions on how to submit the petition signature electronically to me. And that's at alexforctsenate.com. Alex, FORCTsenate.com. That website has the ability, you have to download. Now, I didn't come up with the rules. In fact, I'm suing, saying that they're unconstitutional, but here's what they are for now. You have to download it, print it, sign it, take a picture, and then email me that picture of that signed petition for your petition to count. Now, we need to get those 1,016 signatures by June 11th. That being said, the federal judge in our case recognizes the urgency and the merit behind what we're saying, and she is holding a hearing on June 5th as to the preliminary constitutionality of these restrictions. So a lot's going to be happening in the coming 2 weeks. When we get on the ballot on June 11th, then it's going to be full out for the next 2 months until August 11th, when the Democratic voters vote in the 11th district. Now, we're still not there yet to qualify for the public financing that we would need to really put up a challenge to be able to take this seat. We still need to collect donations of between $5 and $250. The link is on my website to make a donation. And we also need to qualify for the ballot in order to access those funds. So it's all hands on deck right now. I'm a little bit busy, but I think that's what I signed up for. And we're having a lot of fun.
And Alex, for the donations, the folks donating to qualify can be residents of anywhere in New Haven, North Haven, or Hamden, not just in the district, correct?
Correct. While the petition signatures can only come from the voters, the donations can come from the people of any of those 3 towns. And even if you don't live in any of those 3 towns, we'll still take your money. You can still help us because we need to raise more money overall from anyone in the United States.
Perfect.
And that website again is Alex for
ctsenate.com.
.com.
Yeah.
Okay, and we'll post that when we post the pod.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, really appreciate you taking time out of your campaigning and litigating to join us here. And best of luck on behalf of...
My pleasure. Anytime. Thank you for having me.
All right. On behalf of Connecticut Inside Out, I'm Steve Gifford. Thanks so much for listening, folks.
Thanks.
So much. Take care, Alex.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, Alex.